Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our Oracle webinar today. So I'm joined here by Ron Caffrey, Oracle Product Specialist from Arrow ECS, who will be going through the webinar with you.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm Ron Caffrey, and I work in Oracle's distribution channel, Arrow ECS, and we do a lot of work with Bytes, of course, in supporting their Oracle licensing business. And I hope what we're going to cover today will help you either whether you're about to make a possible Oracle purchase or indeed just considering the compliance of maybe some of the licensing environments that you've already got. And there's a lot of folklore about Oracle licensing because Oracle don't make it very simple to understand what goes on. So let's sorry, we just have. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so Oracle doesn't produce a nice simple booklet about licensing. The information is scattered in many, many places. I mean, I've even found some crucial facts buried in my Oracle support on the technical side. And it's kind of my job to try and pull all these things together and make sense of it all. And some of the sources aren't even available to customers, which is a bit crazy. But And some of these rules have been written years ago and are a bit obscure. They're open to various interpretations, and people can go off with the wrong kind of idea about some of them, and don't always sort of keep up with what's going on in the industry very clearly. So unless, like me, you work with them full time, you are likely to get confused about Oracle licensing. But you've got to bear in mind that Oracle has the contractual right to audit customers' estates, and they are one of the more aggressive organizations at doing that. So that's, you do need to be vigilant, and what we're trying to do today is to help you. If you have any kind of inkling that you might have a problem as a result of what I'm going to tell you today, then obviously we hope that you contact your Bytes account manager, and we'll try and we'll work together to kind of resolve what the situation is. If Oracle do come in and audit, then non-compliance could lead to back payments being demanded at full list price for the period of non-compliance. So you really don't want to be faced with that situation, which is why it makes sense to try and engage with Bytes and seek resolution of the situation quietly without alerting Oracle, which we're not obliged to pass any information back to Oracle if we're looking at your details with Bytes. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to look at the named user plus metric. Now, most of the technology products are available on two different licensing metrics, and this is one of them. And it's often misunderstood, so I've taken many of the questions I've had over the years and kind of put some kind of explanations here about them. This first bullet point is my sentence that I've invented. A user under this metric is a real individual, or it could be an automated device, like an electricity meter just waking up periodically and sending a signal back to an Oracle system. But let's concentrate on the real individuals. That tells you something already, because people ask me, is it about whether you've got an identity in the database, or is it about how your middleware connects to your database, how many connection threads you've got between those? No, you actually go back to the front end of the system and you count the real individuals. So if you got that in your head, that's a good starting point. And again, when I say who interacts with the license system, it's not about whether you've actually got a connection to Oracle. If you perform an action and as a one-to-one result of that action, something happens in that Oracle system, then Oracle will consider you to be a user. So I've condensed all of that thought process into what is quite a simple sentence. It's not, of course, these days a measure of concurrency. So before September 2002, it was possible to say if you had 3,000 users of a system, but you only ever had 750 at any one time, there was this concurrent device metric. And some people still have those contracts, and they are honored if you've still got them. But you haven't been able to buy that now for 13 years in terms of a new estate. So we go back to the fact it's all the real individuals. And because of that, again, it doesn't support the notion of job sharing because we count the real individuals again. So that's why that term is quite useful. Unless, again, obviously everything's negotiable with Oracle if you're large enough company, so people do have special contracts. I can only deal with the norm, if you like. Those are the kind of normal truths that I'm trying to put across today. Now, despite the term named user plus, you're not obliged to keep a register of names and provide it to Oracle. It's accepted that people will come and go, but if Oracle comes in and audits a period of activity on the system, you'll need to have enough licenses to cover all the perceived users that are using the system. And one thing I've noticed is that people do tend to focus maybe on just on one issue, like looking at the database. But if you're using Oracle middleware as well as part of your application, then you do need to think about the user community of both of those if you're measuring named user plus. And you could use the processor metric, of course. So, for example, you might have an Oracle database with 1,000 users, but there might be an Oracle Forms application used by 25 of those. So you'd have a different named user plus quantity for Oracle Forms compared to the database. They don't have to be the same, but they do have to reflect the reality of those individual products. Again, some people think that having a web-style, browser-based architecture makes NUPS invalid. Well, no, it doesn't. What really matters when you drill down is if I was able to go into an internet cafe and register myself as a user of that system, well then you can't claim that you're in control of the user community exactly, so NUPS would be invalid in that case. But you can have browser-based applications available across the internet to a partner firm, for example, and that is perfectly valid as long as everyone is controlled. And just a pointer, what's now called the Oracle Master Agreement, used to be called the OLSA, that has a lot of minima for these NUP licenses. So although you think of it as a legal document, there's a lot of technical information about the licensing rules that relate to specific products, so it's worth going to that. Now, this slide's a bit of a crazy thing, but I designed to try and explain how you solve a particular problem. If you're trying to count named user plus licenses for a number of different environments, and you might have complications like some people use 2 or 3 of the systems, other people just use 1 of them, it's actually trying to figure out how many users you should be counting is quite difficult. So you just treat it as a single total. So the ice tray there, in reality, if those were a set of computing environments, they probably wouldn't be uniform in the way that the ice tray is. But if you can imagine an ice tray with varied size cube components in it, so if you pour in water into the ice cube tray, that would tell until it's level. Then you've got the sum of all the mandated minima that Oracle would apply for that product. So like database has got 25 named user plus licenses per processor, and so that would be the mandated minimum. And so this is saying this is how you count that. And then having done that, you empty that jug and put the water back, so that in fact you can now measure on the side of the jug what the sum of the mandated minima for all those environments was. Then you take an identical jug and fill it up to the actual blended user count. That's taking account of what I said. If people use multiple systems, you just count all the real individuals regardless of which systems they're using. And then you simply use the algebraic expression max. You license the maximum of the sum of the mandated minima or the actual blended user count. So I hope that makes sense, and it is the right way to approach it rather than trying to fragment it, which just leads to complications. So now the other metric that's widely used, of course, is processor metric. Now, you must be aware this means 2 entirely different things. So, and this is one of Oracle's simpler rules. For any product with standard edition in the name, and that includes standard edition 1, for example, database, a processor is counted as an occupied CPU socket, and the cores have no significance whatsoever. Hard to believe, but it's true. So if I have a 4-socket machine, maybe I've only got two sockets actually occupied. I can run standard edition on that server as long as that's the maximum capacity of the server, 4 sockets, but you would have 2 processor licenses for 2 occupied sockets. Now for everything else that Oracle sells, a processor is worked out quite differently. So you add up all the cores in all the relevant sockets, and then Oracle has a page where you can look up the designated multi-core factor for that chip type, and just to save you the effort, if you're using Intel or AMD x86 chips, then the factor is 0.5. So effectively you're licensing half of the cores in that environment. So an example, 2 quad-core Xeons would be 8 cores. 8 times 0.5 is 4 processor licenses. And interestingly as well, for example, an enterprise database, named user plus, you would still need to do that calculation. So you would come up with the answer of 4 processors, and then you apply this 25 mandated minimum. So for that environment, you'd have to buy at least 100 NUPs, or however many users were actually present. So there's, the price list tells you, if you would have access as a customer to the global dollar-based price book, but you look at the price for a processor of standard and of enterprise, and you think that's a differential, a sort of fixed differential. But as I'll show you in a moment, it really isn't. By the way, the document I'm alluding to there with the multi-core factors, I don't know why, but it has this heading called effective date in 2009. I guess that just means when it was introduced, but it makes it look as if that's kind of an outdated copy, but it's not. And you'll find all the latest changes are listed in a small table at the end. So it is a valid document. So just to reinforce what I said about there is no fixed differential between standard and enterprise databases, which seems shocking to some people to hear me say that, let's consider that we were going to run with a couple of Intel dual-core sockets. And if we look at standard edition, that would be 2 sockets. Remember, 2 processors equals 2 sockets. That's about 22K at list price. Enterprise, it's 4 cores times 0.5 is 2 processor licenses of that, and that's about 60K. But let's say we can't get dual cores anymore, which is probably realistic. If we use quad cores, well, can't do any harm. Well, it can actually. If you're running standard, no change, because we've still got 2 actual sockets, and as I said, the cores don't count. Enterprise, we've doubled the number of cores, so unsurprisingly, we've doubled the cost. Even quad cores are kind of a bit passé now. So we've got chips with 6, 8, 12, 16 cores on them. So the core density now, is a very dangerous thing in terms of your enterprise licensing being correct. Most people aren't aware of this either. It doesn't usually kick in, but processor aggregation benefit is something you're allowed to do. Classically, it helps most if you've got, for example, some of the older Spark chips where there's a 0.75 multi-core factor. So in other words, you license 3 out of every 4 cores. But you are permitted to aggregate all the identical chips before applying the factor, and the example here will show you how you could be saving £30,000 at list price by understanding this principle. So if I've got 2 development and test servers with 2 cores each, that's probably 2 cores are probably in a hardware partition using Solaris containers, and a server production using 4 cores. So how many enterprise licenses do we need? Well, each of the dev and test machines would be 3/4 of 2 cores would be 1.5, which you round up to 2. So we end up with 2 plus 2 plus the 3 for production, i.e. 0.75 times 4. So we'd end up with 7 licenses. But if you aggregate them, you find we've actually got 8 cores altogether, 0.75. That gives us an answer of 6. So as I say, that saved you at list price £30,000 just from knowing that principle. Support. Okay, so theoretically, support for Oracle products is optional. We are obliged to quote it to you along with the product pricing. And remember that keeping up your support includes the right to upgrade the asset to a later version. Licenses are actually version agnostic as such, but you're not supposed to upgrade the product, say, from 11G to 12C if you don't have the support. Now, when you're faced with your annual support renewals, which come to you directly from Oracle, you might be tempted to drop some of those items to reduce your sort of annual renewal bill. But there's a document I pointed to on this page, and on the second page of that, it talks about something called a license set. And in fact, all of your database software, irrespective of the edition, is considered by Oracle to be the same thing. It's because basically the Oracle database is one code set for them to maintain. and support. And what they're saying in there is that you actually have to support, you have to have support everywhere for that product license set or not nowhere. So what happens is this, and I discovered this by accident when someone tried to do this, and I actually got sight of the letter that came back. So if you write to Oracle and say, I want to discontinue support for these licenses, they'll come back and actually say, you've got to confirm that you're discontinuing the licenses. Now, you might just think they're just that you're just making the same point again, but you're not. You're saying now that they're asking you, are you going to disable this software so that it can't be used anymore? Because if you do, it's not valid. So you do have to watch out for that letter, that you understand that you cannot continue to use those instances of the product if you have support elsewhere. Okay, now here's a difficult topic for many people to wander into issues here. I mean, consolidation and projects are rife, of course, in the industry of virtualization as well, and also a question with customizing, for example, e-business suite applications. So to start off with, let's consider you've bought some ISV business applications. So these Oracle partners who have sold you a business solution with Oracle technology, and you may typically acquire these as something called ASFU, application-specific full use. So the idea of that license is it attracts a bigger discount from Oracle to the partner, but those licenses are restricted to being used with that intellectual property of that solution. And similarly, if you bought Oracle e-business suite licenses, and if you don't customize e-business suite, you get these restricted use rights to use the relevant technology like enterprise database and app server for free. So now if you customize, in fact if you customize an ISV application or the e-business suite beyond the permitted scope, then you'll need to upgrade to full use licenses. And be aware that if you consolidate, as we'll see later, that the whole of a cluster might become the scope of licensing, and we can't have ASFU or these free restricted use rights of products running alongside each other or with other normal full use licenses. So these consolidation projects can quickly lead to invalid non-compliant situations. Enterprise Manager, this is not very well understood licensing for this, because Enterprise Manager really is a kind of an umbrella term across a whole set of products, and some of it's free, which is the good news, but Oracle doesn't, of course, tend to come out with statements like this bit's free. You kind of have to work it out by deduction. So every time traditionally you installed a database or an application server, you'd get a database control or an application control. Those are parts of, those are bits of OEM to manage those particular instances of the product. Now, pretty quickly you get bored with having to go to, 10, 100, 1,000 different OEM instances to look at your system. So they brought out the idea of grid control, and now it's called cloud control in the last couple of years, as a central console for all of the estate. That's great, and that's actually free. Again, people don't know that because it's not stated anywhere. And you have a free database. It now documents it as being Enterprise Edition. It didn't used to say that, but so you're allowed a free Enterprise database as the repository, and you can mix it with your RMAN backup repository as well. So that's all good. People also think that you can't manage standard edition instances with cloud control, but you can. What you're not allowed to do, of course, is use any of the features which relate to the extra cost packs, like the diagnostic pack and the tuning pack, for example. They are only available with Enterprise Edition, and you should actually go, if you're using any standard edition instances or even Enterprise where you're not using the packs, then you should go into cloud control and positively disable those things before you get audited, just to be safe. You should be aware also that CLI there stands for control line interface. So there are some command line things that you can do which Oracle document as constituting use of those packs. So even if you just run some SQL Plus queries against some bits of the data dictionary in respect to performance, some of the supplied views and reports, you can be clobbered by Oracle for saying you're using this pack. To look at that in more detail, you should go to the full documentation set for Enterprise Manager, look at the licensing manual, and you'll find a section in there under database management. If you look at diagnostic and tuning packs, it'll list all the things you shouldn't be using if you don't have them, and you get quite a surprise by reading all of that list. And again, some people like to think that these packs are licensed for a handful of DBAs who are going to benefit from using them, but in fact Oracle's perception is that the packs are licensed to reflect the value that you're getting from the packs, and therefore they match the target environment. So if you've got an 8-core enterprise database and you want diagnostic and tuning, you'll be buying 8 licenses of the same metric for these packs as well. Obviously important to understand high availability and disaster recovery licensing as well, and there's a free there's a document available publicly called the Software Investment Guide. Not one of the best written documents in the world, and it's getting rather ancient and has been sort of become a bit garbled, but let me just talk you through them. So the backup model, where you keep physical backups on disk or tape, and if you had an emergency, you would restore to a standby server and build a new database from those backups. Now, in theory, there's no charge for that, for having that spare capability, because they don't really exist at the same time. But I know from the audit team of Oracle that if you're allowed to test that all of that works 4 times a year, but if you leave the code installed between those occasions, then they'll say that actually you do need to license it, which is crazy, but that's what they do. So if you do test it, I can only suggest that if you can park that image of those executables somewhere on storage, take it off the server, because the last thing you want to do in an emergency is to start reinstalling Oracle before you can build your backup database. So just be careful of that. The well-known failover model, which sometimes is called a 10-day model, it's not disaster recovery at all. This is about localized high availability with shared storage. It does have to be in a single storage cabinet, bizarre as that seems. So even if you've got mirroring going on to protect your disks, they will have to be in a single storage cabinet. So you're given 10 days grace per year to use it on that spare server in the cluster. So if server A dies, server B kicks in, starts up Oracle, has access to the database and the log files, cleans up any in-flight transactions, and you're back in business. But it is just in respect of a primary and a secondary server, and this isn't in a virtual context. This is sort of traditional clustering approach. So that 10-day rule never applies to disaster recovery, as you'll see. So standby is another clause they have, and that's anything based on log shipping. So with Enterprise, you've got Data Guard. You can also do a kind of homespun approach to shipping the logs with Standard Edition. But again, you're keeping a clone of the database continuously updated and synchronized with production, and you will have to license it. And the surprising one, I suppose, people are shocked by is remote mirroring, as the name of another clause Oracle has. They didn't want people trying to subvert the standby principle by using non-Oracle techniques, like just basically using the storage to replicate the database. They put that rule in there about 9 years ago. So you do have to license that even if you're not using Oracle capabilities, and even if that storage where it's being replayed isn't permanently attached to a server. When it is, you'll have to have a license, and so you need, and licenses don't come and go day by day, so it does have to be licensed. Hardware partitioning has been around for years and years and years, and the document I've listed there defines what are the valid hardware partition schemes that Oracle recognizes. What you're basically considering here is a sort of physical ring fencing of resources that can't vary, and can be treated then as the scope of licensing, as if it was a real server. So, for example, this is one of your key weapons in trying to contain costs. Okay, so if you have a hardware partition of, say, 2 cores on a 16-core machine, then you can make the costs of licensing fit for purpose, if you like. Also, if you're running multiple Oracle products on the server, if you license both products for the whole server, you're not getting good value for money, because the application and the database, for example, would have to coexist. They can't both have all of the CPUs. So if you put them in respective hardware partitions, you can actually again make it fit for purpose. It also becomes possible to have mixed metrics. So normally you can't have named user plus and processor metrics on the same server, but if you've got hardware partitioning, then that rule is applied within the hardware partition. And so you now could have a box with a, say, UAT and the development instance, and they could have different metrics. So come on to virtual server farms now. So let's just consider this simple example with 6 servers. We're just imagine they've got 2 occupied sockets and they've got quad cores, just to keep the numbers simple. So if you're using VMware or Hyper-V, how many processor licenses would you need for enterprise database? Well, you'd need 24, surprisingly, because even if you're just, you may have several oracles running in a virtual machine of 2 or 4 cores or something, but Oracle looks at the size of the cluster as being potential targets for running that virtual machine, and they're not interested in any. They don't recognize a VM as a hardware partition. So this is kind of scary stuff. So we've got 8 cores on each machine. That's 4 licenses, and we've got 6 of them. Now, similar question. Oracle's got its own hypervisor called Oracle VM for x86, and how many processor licenses do we need here? Well, it might be 24 again, or it might be 2. Okay, so if you're using live migration, which Oracle VM can do, it's documented that that overrules the use of hardware partitioning. So Oracle has a strange concept of hardware partitioning where it's not only a ring-fenced set of resources, but it's very statically located. This isn't intuitive for most people, including me, but that's how they look at it. So if you don't use live migration, if you use conventional methods of high availability, then you could license the 4 cores that you need, and that would just be 2 processor licenses. So the hardware partition becomes really, with Oracle VM, becomes a very, very powerful tool for managing your costs. Now, here's an interesting aside. If we keep the same environment and we want to run Database Standard Edition, now there's a rule, of course, that says Standard Edition must have a maximum potential of 4 sockets, regardless of how many are occupied. So with VMware, how many named user plus licenses would we require for 17 actual users? And the answer is 17. The NUP metric, it means for any number of servers. Now, normally that's somewhat compromised by the mandated minima. You know, going back to the ice tray slide. But with this is what I call the magic combination: Standard Edition database and named user plus licensing. There are no per server or per CPU minima, so we're perfectly valid running having 17 people with 17 licenses, and we can have the world's biggest VMware cluster. And there's nothing Oracle can do about it at the moment until they change the rules. Now, I put in this extra slide here because it kind of distills some of what the important things I've been saying. I came up with this term about 3 or 4 years ago, having spent years, sort of busying myself around all these rules and thinking them all through and applying them to for people's situations. I kind of distill this environment, this licensable environment concept. It's not something Oracle talks about, but I found it really helpful. So, what can it be? What we're trying to do here is say, what is the valid scope of licenses that I need to purchase, or if I've redeployed, how can I test my compliance on this new environment? So you can license the whole of a physically managed server in the good old-fashioned way, as we always used to do for years. I put physically managed there just to show that, I mean, it's not just one server in a VMware cluster, for example. It's a non-hypervisor server running an operating system. It can be an approved regime of hardware partitioning, and on x86 kit, which so many people use these days, the only candidates for hardware partitioning are OVM for x86 without live migration, which we've already said. You could run, if you're a bit of a minority sport, but you could run Solaris x86 with capped containers as well, running it natively without a hypervisor. Both of those are valid hardware regimes. Or, as we've seen, it's the whole of a virtual cluster. Now, that's even got worse slightly. We've heard now that Oracle saying that from vCenter 5.1 of VMware, that instance of vCenter might manage multiple clusters, and Oracle will take the view that they are, multiple clusters now become the migration target potentially and must be licensed. Now that's very harsh, but that's what we're hearing that audits are starting to come up with. So just to warn you about that, it would be sensible not to pursue such a strategy. And then finally, last slide, just wanted to remind you of the sort of things that I think about when I'm trying to come up with the correct license and the right price. You need to think about what's my production context look like. Could my development test and UAT environments might be done on a different metric, but I need to think about getting the licensable environment appropriate for those. How do you do standby backup kind of things? That's the HA and DR slide that we had. The power of hardware partitioning in managing your costs and understanding what isn't hardware partitioning. Hosting now, hosting is a term widely used in the industry, but in the Oracle context, it means something very specific, where you as a client don't own the licenses, where someone has a hosting license and they are allowed to let you use that service. If you own the licenses and you choose to run them in a sort of managed, what I would call a managed service provider, then you still own the licenses, and you have to worry about what is the licensable environment you're being provided with. Does it match the scope of your licensing, or has your managed service provider not understood the things I've just been talking about? Time shift changes, well, that's something for me to worry about typically when sometimes rules change, and if people are running older versions of products, how does those new rules apply? Because there's kind of only ever one set of rules, which is the current ones. Sometimes you get into thorny considerations there. Migration of licensing, that's if you wanted to go from standard to enterprise, that would be a migration. If you want to go from named user plus to processor, that would be a migration. If you want to go to an old BEA license to an Oracle WebLogic license, that's a migration. It's just a process we have to go through with Oracle before you can't buy any of those old type of licenses. For example, from BEA, you've got to, and if you're trying to extend an estate of those, you need to convert them. Got to be aware of any specific rules, like you're allowed to use real application clusters with standard edition, but there must only be 4 CPU sockets in the whole rack cluster. We've covered the quantities and the minima to think about with the named user metrics, and just the basic choice of metric as well. So I think those 2 last slides are probably ones you want to perhaps keep handy, because remembering about the licensable environment and remembering all these dimensions to the challenge of being getting the right licensing fit for your intentions are probably the 2 slides that sort of resonate most, I think. So that's the end of my session, and I'll hand back to Amy.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Ron. So now we're going to go to the Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, just pop those in the questions box, which is just at the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer those for you shortly. Okay, so we have a question here from Brian, who said, if an Oracle estate can be accessed via an internet front-end web form, how would this be licensed? Is there a connector license?
No, well, there's nothing called a connector license. I think when I was talking about named user plus licensing, for example, I said that web-based access is perfectly fine as long as you can demonstrate that you're in control of that user community and that people can't self-register themselves. That would be the obvious example where it's not under control. But the fact it's technically out there on the web in itself isn't a prohibitor. So I mean, I have to say processor metrics are more typical for those kind of requirements, but NUPs can be valid when the situation's under control.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So Brian's also asked, in your experience, how often do Oracle change the rules?
Well, probably not often enough, actually. It's hard to say because there are so many different rules. That they're fairly static. They may revise from time to time. They may put in a new hardware partitioning regime as being acceptable, but they're a bit sluggish at doing that. They don't tend to, I mean, they hardly use the word virtualization in a commercial context at all, which doesn't kind of chime with reality. So no, that's my challenge really, is to kind of find all the places Oracle talks about licensing principles and then, come up with a sensible set of principles like I've done with the licensable environment, to try and kind of distill that and make it more helpful for people to kind of understand how do I measure my compliance. So no, they don't change the rules very often, but of course there's always subtle changes going on about them. They may alter them, in the price book at the end you've got the glossary of terms, so they might decide to change the rule about how you measure named user plus licensing for Golden Gate. There might be something buried in the glossary there. So it's just a matter of detail, but I wish they would kind of completely overhaul it and publish a clear booklet on the subject, but they don't, so that keeps me in a job.
Thanks, Ron. So we have a question here from Fiona who said, is it still five named user minimum requirement per company for SE and SE1? So if she has 4 users, does she need to buy 5 licenses?
Yes, that's spot on. A lot of people don't even realize that the minimum of 5 is per organization, not per computer or per CPU, which some people presume. So the minimum you could have in the organization is 5, but it doesn't usually seem like a great burden. And remember, that is a multi-server license, so that those people could use that product on any number of servers, including DR, test, development, UAT, whatever they want. But yeah, you've got the facts right, basically.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So we have a question here from Ian, who said, for standard processor licenses, are there virtualization rights where you have the database managed via a single VM host, but without any mobility?
Well, that would only be with Oracle VM, as I outlined. So, as I said, if you turn off live migration with OVM, there's a documented approach to building a hardware partition, pinning the resources, and that is the kind of main weapon you have in a virtualized context. But if we're talking about Hyper-V or VMware or anything else, then there's no, you're dealing with the full physical server and indeed potentially all the physical servers. So I think we kind of covered all of that.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So we have a question here from Darren, who said, I'm concerned about a lack of hardware partitioning in our VMware cluster. We have one VMware cluster with many servers, but Oracle is only running on 2 of them. They are different CPU architecture, AMD versus Intel, which in practice prevents migration. But do you think this would be enough to comply with Oracle's rules?
No, I don't really. I think they wouldn't be interested in that if they because they kind of, they don't certify for VMware, of course, anyway. And their attitude is we're not interested in supporting or recognizing any features like DRS, for example, in VMware. So even though VMware have a web page that says if you document how you set up your DRS node affinity rules, that'll keep Oracle happy. Well, I'm afraid that's completely deluded point of view. I know that people get audited and they will just look at the cluster size, or as I said, potentially even multiple clusters that are still accessible via the vCenter control. So, no, I think I think we probably need to discuss that situation with you in more detail. If you contact Bytes, we'll happily spend some more time on that with you.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, so it looks like that's all the questions we have today. We've just had one more pop-up, actually. This is from Ian, who said, so if we have a single physical VMware host, we can license for standard edition based on sockets and can run a number of virtual servers on that host without licensing each virtual server individually.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, you never pay for multiple instances of a product. What you have to focus on is that licensable environment idea. So, I mean, if your cluster is one physical server only, and if you're saying to me, can I run out multiple Oracle instances, either within a VM or in separate VMs, well then yes, and it doesn't cost you a penny more because you've licensed for that machine. If you had a hardware partition with OVM, you could license for that OVM partition, but with other hypervisors you'll be paying for the server. And if it's a cluster of one, then at least you'll be containing it. You may like virtualization as a simple deployment model, but you might limit it to one server in the cluster, in which case at least it's not escalating the cost. You don't have to go back and pay Oracle more money every time you extend the cluster. So I think, yeah, as a general principle, multiple instances of the product within the licensable environment are never extra cost to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so it looks like that's the last of the questions. So if you could please fill out the critique form at the end for us, as mentioned previously, we'd really appreciate that. You can also email us on tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, or you can contact your Bytes account manager if you prefer to do it that way. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much, Ron, for presenting the webinar today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.